So, Joe, have you heard of the Remarkable?
The Remarkable. Oh. Is this like that tablet
It is.
that I've seen? Like Instagram, they're like desperately trying to get me to buy one of these. Like I see these ads constantly, so I must fit their target audience really well.
I would say you probably do. I have one.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
now I'm super jealous. See, this is all the more reason I need to come see you.
Yep, it's true. So, the short version of this is it's an e ink screen that you can take notes using a Apple Pencil style stylus. And I say Apple Pencil just because that's the best stylus I've ever used up until this one. And I don't think this one's a whole lot better. It's a little bit different feel. So I would say it is a little bit nicer than an Apple Pencil. But the whole idea is that you can just take notes. It's like permanently in good notes, although it's black and white e-ink. So you're not using it for sketch notes or anything like that. It is simply an analog slash digital note-taking device, which, as Martin points out in the chat, is cool, but the price.
Yes, is not small.
Yeah. So it's not going to replace an iPad. It's more likely going to replace a notebook if you were to have a bunch of meetings. But I have a review unit and I am digging it. Although, again, the use case here is very narrow, so I'm not necessarily recommending you go drop $600 on this thing unless you're in a lot of meetings and taking a lot of analog notes. But I do like it, and I do see why people go crazy over this thing.
Yeah, I've seen this thing around for a while now and have seriously considered pulling the trigger on it many times. But even like one of them I've looked at is like $300, and for Christmas they've got like $100 off on it. So even at $200, I still haven't pulled the trigger on it because I just don't see the justification in swapping out my even an expensive $20 notebook for a $200 reusable notebook, essentially. So
That's fair.
as much as it seems really cool, I don't think I'm going to do that. Now, what I am potentially going to do, have you seen like the boogie boards, like the kids version of these
Yep.
things? They're like $20 on Amazon. We just got one of those for my youngest, who just turned 5, which I'm not sure how that happened. But we got one for her, and I told Becky's like, I kind of want one of these because it's only one page, and you can write on it, and you push a button, and it clears, and then you can do it again, but it feels like you're writing on paper. So like that, I could maybe get behind. That one I might be okay with at $20.
Well,
But
if you like the boogie board, you'll like this thing. This is like a big kid boogie board.
I'm sure. Yes. Okay. Well, you decide you don't want it, and you don't have to send it back.
All right, I'll keep that in mind. We've only got one item here of follow-up. So did you research how self-control and ADHD tie together for you?
Yeah, basically, self-control doesn't exist, and you have to work at building it. And oddly enough, I'm kind of itching to get into today's book because I know that there's actually quite a bit. It doesn't call this out specifically, but this particular topic I found, maybe as just the lens I was seeing it through, it came up a lot. So it's a thing that I'm still processing through. I don't think I'm ever going to finish processing that one because I'm learning there's so many different facets to it. But as far as a follow-up action item here, I certainly did do this. I just don't have any good answers to what I found.
Okay.
So there's a lot of work to be done, basically. The gist of it is a lot of brain training is what I learned about. But that's not a quick and easy thing to do.
No, it is not. All right. Well, should we just jump into today's book then?
Yeah, because it's probably going to be long.
There is that possibility. I tried to keep the outline short. So the book that we're discussing today is 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And this is something that I picked to your amazement. And because I did not like the previous Oliver Burkeman book that we had gone through, which was The Antidote, I believe. And this one didn't feel like that one to me anyways. Maybe it was just the fact that I really enjoyed the subject matter. I don't know a whole lot about Oliver Burkeman's story, but he kind of explains throughout the course of this book that he was hashtag productivity coach guy. And he was telling people how to be more productive. And then this book is kind of like the Ecclesiastes version of everything is meaningless. He even references that.
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, he even references the book of Ecclesiastes at one point. But long before he got there, that's what I was thinking of as he was going through this. The title, 4,000 Weeks, it points to the fact that as a human, you have roughly 4,000 weeks to live, which in the big scheme of things is really not all that much. The book itself is broken down into, I guess, 4 parts. Well, you could say 2. There's an introduction. There's part 1, which is choosing to choose. There's 6 chapters there. I think part 2 is beyond control, 8 chapters there, and then an afterword, which is beyond hope. And for the outline, I kind of broke this down into introduction, part 1, part 2, and then afterword. And then I got several points underneath each of these, but we're not going to go through all 14 chapters plus the introduction and afterword. Sound good to you?
Yeah, because I was reading through this, I don't know, an hour or so ago before I started processing what all I wanted to say today, and realized you didn't mark out all the chapters for this one, which is probably one, like, that happens on Bookworm, but it doesn't happen a lot. Like, we have a tendency to just run the chapters. Maybe we skip some of them, but this time I kind of like the way you did this. Just like, let's take some of the overarching themes from each of these parts and talk about them.
Sure.
So good job.
Thank you. I agree. I tend to, me specifically, I think, to try to stick to the outline of the books whenever possible.
I'm a wild card.
I feel like this one, they kind of blend together fairly well. That's not to say there aren't distinct points and themes in each of the chapters, but I feel like this reads more like a connected narrative as opposed to individual sections or essays. Let me just run through the names of the chapters here so people are familiar with it. Number 1, The Limit Embracing Life. Number 2, The Efficiency Trap. Chapter 3 is Facing Finitude. Chapter 4, Becoming a Better Procrastinator. Chapter 5, The Watermelon Problem. Chapter 6, The Intimate Interpreter. That's all part of part 1. And then part 2, We Never Really Have Time. Chapter 8, You Are Here. Chapter 9, Rediscovering Rest. Chapter 10, The Impatience Spiral. Chapter 11, Staying on the Bus. Chapter 12, The Loneliness of the Digital Nomad. Chapter 13, Cosmic Insignificance Therapy. Chapter 14, The Human Disease. And then the afterword being a short little thing at the end. I will say, though, in terms of the general overall structure of this book, I feel like the distinctions between the 2 sections are well defined. And I really like the way this ends with the 5 questions to help you start to make the most of your finite time. I am on a big asking the right questions kick. Not in small part inspired by the sense-making workshop that I did with Nick Milo. But as we were prepping for that, we were kind of thinking through what's the takeaway we want to give people. And it's really just asking questions to help you approach your problems from different perspectives, kind of like the great mental models back when we did that book. And I've kind of continued that even after the workshop. Bought a book called Personal Socrates by the Baron Fig people. Have you seen this one?
I've seen it, have not been through it.
It's basically a collection of questions asked by famous, successful people. And the idea being, like, if you can ask these questions and see how they applied them, you can kind of do the same thing for yourself and hopefully live a life of meaning, which I think is kind of Oliver Burkeman's big point with all of this anyways. So all that to say, a long version of saying I really like the fact that he gave you questions at the end instead of a system or a simple 3-step formula to live a better life, etc., because it's really not that simple.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely love that he did that. And I also love that he didn't do that until the very end. And when he did it, it was very, very brief, but he also doesn't tell you how to do it, when to do it, what order to do it in. He just says, here's some questions to ask. Figure it out. Like, that's basically what he does. So I'm, oddly enough, a fan of that. Usually I'm like, tell me exactly what you want me to do, and then I'll try to do that. This case, like, no. it was done well, I think.
Yeah, agreed. So let's jump into the introduction here, which is titled "In the Long Run, We're All Dead." It's a little bit of a funny title, although it is very appropriate given the subject matter of the book, I'd argue. Again, this is where he lays out the baseline for the title. The average lifespan is about 4,000 weeks. He also kind of says in this introductory part that since our time is short, then our primary concern should be around this whole concept of time management. Although in the next section, part 1, he's actually going to explain how the way that we do that is wrong. But right here, he talks about page 13. There's a quote. He says, "Productivity is a trap." Remember, he's a former productivity expert. "Productivity is a trap. Becoming more efficient just makes you feel more rushed, and trying to clear the decks simply makes them fill up again faster." And right away, when I read that, I'm hooked because I feel like we can all relate to that in some way, shape, or form, even if my work situation doesn't feel like that currently, but I remember what that feels like. I remember it very distinctly. And I feel like I've been working hard to fight against that, but with mixed success. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then as he transitions out of this introductory section, the big point he leaves you with is that whole idea of work-life balance that you've heard about from all these people. Yeah, not only is that not a thing, no one in the history of the universe has ever achieved that. So just knock it off.
And that's very refreshing and frustrating at the same time, because that's what you strive for, right? It's like, I want to make sure I spend the right amount of time with my family, the right amount of time at work. I want to make sure I'm fully engaged in all of those. If you want to start using all the buzzwords, like, you could totally do that. I want to be mindful at home. I want to be mindful at work. I want to be spending all of my time appropriately. And as we go through this, even as I'm saying that, I'm realizing, like, just saying the phrase "spending my time" feels very wrong now that I've read this. And that's, I think, what he's trying to do is set you up, because the problem he has here is he's trying to introduce a completely new way of thinking about time. And we have such a foundational view of it that is so permeated through so many aspects of just life in general that it's really hard for us to dismantle even our terminology, which goes through so many different areas without us even realizing it. It's hard to dismantle that set of semantics without completely dismantling the way you even work. So yes, it's a challenge, and I'm glad that he set us up and starts the process of like changing the way we even say terms and say phrases as we begin this whole journey through this thing.
Yeah, this is the perfect setup for everything that he is going to talk about. I agree with you that phrase in some ways is refreshing, in some ways is unsettling. Did you stop to ask yourself why that was?
As to why it's unsettling?
Yeah.
I know that whenever I got through the introduction, I set the book down and went and stared out the window for about 5 minutes.
Me too.
It's like, it was hard to grasp, like, what just happened. I haven't had that experience reading in a book in a very long time, where I've had to set it down and process it in the moment. Like, generally, like, I'm a very fast mover when it comes to just thoughts in general. And going through this first, just the introduction, I was like, what just happened? I need to stop. Like, I couldn't get my head around it when I which is frustrating because I normally catch on to things very quickly, I feel. So yeah, I needed to stop on this one.
Yep. So did I, which is why the first bullet point that I added in the next part here. So let's go into part 1, choosing to choose. And my first bullet point here is on self-worth and time management, because there's a point in this chapter where he says that your self-worth shouldn't be tied up on or into how you spend your time. And that is maybe a radical idea, because he's also talking about how we don't have time, we don't make time, we are time. And so if you believe that how you spend your time is ultimately the thing that you're going to be held accountable for at the end of your life. This kind of puts you into existential crisis mode, I feel.
Yep. I went for a walk with the dog after this one. Like you're going to catch that theme. There's a lot of Joe stopping on this one. I only finished this just this morning, but it had nothing to do with being interested in the book. It was just trying to get the that's why I say, like, trying to get those foundational views of time, like, and wrapping my brain around what he's talking about here, because he's absolutely right. Like, so much of the way that I view whether or not my day was successful is how I spent my time. Not necessarily like what did I accomplish and who did I impact and what struggles did I work through. Like, that, none of that matters. It's how much time did I spend goofing off and how much time was I productive and did I do the right things with that time? Like, without me realizing it, so much of self-worth and the way I value my own daily success is tied up in time management, which I'm terrible at, of course. But I really had to stop and just, okay, if that's wrong to value myself based on how I spend time, like, the ramifications of that are large.
Yes, they are.
Which, of course, we're going to get into even more. But yes, this existential crises happen a lot with this book, I found.
It's true. It's true. Although in this first chapter, he also talks about task orientation as opposed to, I guess, time orientation, where task orientation is that the rhythms of life emerge organically from the tasks themselves instead of a timeline. And he mentions that babies are the ultimate task-oriented beings and they don't care how long anything takes. All they know is this is the thing that's important right now. So in some ways, he's holding that up as an ideal, like that's what we should be like. But since time became a resource to be used, and people have had to coordinate their efforts to show up at work at the same time and all that kind of stuff, you know, you have to measure it in a different way. And you combine that with the fundamental problem, you know, since time became a resource to be used, people began berating themselves for wasting it. The fundamental problem here is that this attitude sets up a rigged game that you can never win. And so the whole point of this first chapter is confronting how limited your time is. And that can be painful when you admit that you can't do it all. And even for myself, knowing that we're going to record this podcast, so we're going to talk about this, on one level, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, obviously, I know that you can't try to do everything. I've given people that same advice, like say no, limit your options. But then you look at your own life and the way that you try to cram more stuff in, and you realize you may know this, but you don't really know this. Understanding it intellectually and actually applying it are two very different things.
Yes. This whole, like, just being aware that your life is finite. Like, he does get into that. I don't remember which chapter it is, so it's probably good we're not going through specific chapters, but he gets into the view that there was an eternity, is an eternity. So there's a life after death, and how if you live as if there's life after death, then what you do here on earth is such a small piece of the bigger picture that it really doesn't matter what you do. It's not that big a deal. You've got infinite time to spend doing whatever you like. So how you spend the next, 100 years, if you're lucky, really doesn't matter. However, if you believe there is no eternity, then you're left with maybe 100 years to spend doing whatever you'd like. And that can lead to a crisis of fitting everything in because you don't have forever to choose the things you need to do. And that leads us down this path of spending time wisely and making sure, experience all the things, travel the world, see everything. And that's where we end up finding ourselves today, right? Like, that's a very common viewpoint that people have, is trying to make sure you fit as much in, the whole bucket list thing, the things you want to do before you die, and trying to crank through as much of that as you possibly can in order to have a life of fully lived experiences with no downtime. And it seems like that's the life that we put on a pedestal, right? Like that's what we
Yeah.
see everyone doing, and that's what we shoot for. But when you talk to those people, they're not always happy. And there's oftentimes a lot of regrets that come with choosing that lifestyle.
Which makes sense. I mean, we both know that, have read other books, I think, that have spoken to that. The people who look so successful, sometimes they're the most miserable because they can't get the thing that they really want. Maybe that's control of their schedule or whatever. But the thing that really got me in this section was this phrase that I hear you say all the time, what needs doing? And he says that what needs doing always expands to fill the time available. And that, again, we've heard Parkinson's law. But when you think about the fact that there will always be more things that need doing, and the things that really need doing are going to eat up all the time that you have available, then it's easy to see why we measure, well, what did I actually get done at the end of the day? And he's basically saying, like, this is a miserable cycle that you got to break out of. And he shares the story of Sisyphus, which is the Greek legend where he was sentenced to push a rock up the hill and then he'd watch it tumble back down again. So he does that over and over and over for eternity. And then says the modern day equivalent of this is emptying your email inbox and immediately seeing it fill up again. And I don't think he's wrong. I really like that analogy. So the efficiency trap, getting into the second point here in the outline, the efficiency trap comes from this second chapter. This is where you have too much to do, so you try to fit more in, which results in even more to do. And I have recognized this. I actually wrote a post a while back. I'll see if I can dig it up and put it in the show notes from a focused episode that David and I were talking through. And I realized that the reason you want to become more efficient for a lot of people, it's in a work situation, you feel overwhelmed, so you get things done faster, and now you've got this space. But then usually your reward for getting things done more efficiently is that you have more work to do. And I don't know a real great way for fighting back against that, and kind of what he's saying in this book, which is, again, kind of uncomfortable, but in certain ways refreshing, is like, just stop fighting it. That's the way it works. Just deal with it.
Yes. And that's tough to do. I was trying to process, like, what's a real world example of this happening. And the only one I could think of is like my day job with what I do at the church, which is all the tech stuff, right? So we've got tons of videos and podcasts and stuff that we're regularly pushing out, but we've got our live stream, we've got Sunday morning, we got classes, we got all sorts of stuff, right? And there's an ever-growing number of things that we could produce. If we just take like the content that we create as a church, that list of podcasts and videos that we create could be infinitely large. So I regularly have these conversations of what we won't do. And I have some very clearly laid out lines for me that then gets relayed to our staff as far as what I will and I won't publish. And that list of things that I won't publish is much longer than the things that I will. So that by itself seems to then kind of force the issue of we're not going to do things. And that means that, like, right now I'm at a sweet spot where the staffing that I have can produce what we want to produce right now without overworking anyone in the process. So, like, we've found a good balance there, but we used to produce more than we do right now. And we backed off because we set those limits. But without those limits, we could go way too far. It gets to be a problem. So that's the closest thing I've been able to come up with, is like how to scale this stuff back. But you're right. If you give yourself, 2 months to create things, hey, guess what? It's going to take that full 2 months. If you give yourself 20 minutes, it'll take that 20 minutes. So just saying, like, if I get something done early, well, forget that. It's not going to happen. Rarely is that going to happen.
Rarely is it going to happen, but then also that's not necessarily a bad thing. The issue is in coming to grips with the fact that regardless of what the ideal is, you're never going to hit it, I would argue. I've been kind of brewing on this even before we read this book. I had a newsletter that I sent out about finding time versus making time, and kind of the thing that I landed on was redeeming the time from the verse in Ephesians where redeem means to buy back and ransom from loss. And reading this book, in particular this section, what he's basically saying is like all your time is lost anyways. So when you think about it from that perspective, going into your day, like you can have your plan, you can time block things, and that's great. Like you're trying to redeem as much time as possible. But when you recognize that it's all a wash anyways, and you don't feel the pressure, like I have to redeem 8 hours worth of time or find 8 hours worth of time, whatever happens. And maybe, I only was able to redeem a couple of hours today, and on my best days, I can redeem 10 hours, whatever. The goal is the intentionality, but recognizing that it's never a resource that I had in the first place. I'm just doing my best to get as much of it as I can in the moment. And then at the end of the day, there's a reset button that gets hit and you try again tomorrow. But you don't beat yourself up if you didn't have a killer day, and you don't spend too much time celebrating if you did. I feel like attaching to either of those outcomes is kind of what sets you up for failure, as he's talking about it at the beginning of this book.
There's so many places I feel like I could take that, but I know that as time has gone on, like I've learned a lot about how I spend or use my days, and especially lately, I've been coming back a lot to the days that I had on the farm and what we did there, because it wasn't time-based at all. I mean, meals were, but it wasn't based on at noon we're going to stop at, it was always like, well, when that fence is done, let's meet up at the house and we'll grab lunch. That might be 2:00. That might be 11:00. Like it didn't matter. It was always task-based, and you always had another task you could do, but the question was always like, which of those need to be done before another group of tasks sneaks up on you and you have to work on those. Like you have to have a lot of equipment maintained before spring gets here so you can plant. Like you don't want to be trying to plant when the equipment's not ready to go. Like that's the type of management that we did. But even that, like I could see even some of what he's railing against here, even in some of that mentality. So it makes you stop and process so many things.
Yes, it does. And it's a healthy perspective shift, I would argue, although we'll get into that, I think, in part 2. But coming back to this efficiency trap and choosing, you've got this menu of things. You can't do it all. So in essence, kind of what you're doing is you're prioritizing, this is the thing I'm going to do first, and then I'm going to do this thing. And at some point along the line of prioritizing things, you're not going to get to it all. And being okay with that, I feel like that is a skill to be developed. And kind of the phrase he uses in chapter 3 is that your entire life is borrowed time. And I like that a lot. I think that fits very well with, at least in my own head, this whole idea of redeeming the time, because whatever I can get is a bonus. It's the cherry on top. I'm not owed anything. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. And it's uncomfortable to think about those types of questions because we think we're really important. And kind of the case he's making at the beginning of the book here is that you're really not. If you look at the totality of human existence, you're one small blip. And yeah, we want to do as much good as we can in the time that we have with whatever resources we have. I feel like on the surface, this book can seem to combat some of these like purpose, mission books like The Second Mountain by David Brooks, but I actually think it complements it really well. because when you think about like the second mountain in particular, the first mountain's all about you. So then you get to the top and you're like, is this it? And the second mountain, you realize, oh, it's the one I should have been climbing the whole time. And that's the one that is about helping other people. So recognizing that you're not going to be able to help everybody, but just do the best you can with what you have and let the chips fall where they may, that eliminates, at least when I was reading through this, it eliminates all the pressure to follow through and achieve certain outcomes. It's like, yeah, I'll try to do this. I'll create the plans because it'll give me the intentionality, but I'm not going to get so attached to the plan that the outcome is something that I feel like I absolutely must create or conjure up. I'm going to give myself permission to be like, oh, well, that didn't work, or the universe had a different plan and that's okay. I guess I'll try something else. And that's actually very freeing.
Yeah, the whole finitude thing that he gets into is like, you can't do everything. You and I have both talked to and coached and been around people who have or have been the people with these really long to-do lists, or they have a task management tool that's loaded up with thousands of tasks. And I know that I've at least personally done some online video workshops and such and coached folks where someone always asks the questions like, I have this huge list and I can't seem to get through it all each day. And the assumption behind that question is that there's some method that they haven't found that will solve that problem, when the real problem is you're trying to do everything. And I can't figure out how to tell you other than tell you point blank that you can't do everything. So you have to choose which of those you're going to do. I remember specifically, I was doing one specific workshop with a friend, and someone spoke up during the Q&A at the end. I'm not going to point out all this because you could go find it. It is public. But this person just asked, like, I've got a dashboard in this task management tool that is about 300 tasks long, and it was broken up between tasks like move the files from one folder to another. And then another one could be take out the trash. And then another one was like almost a full project in itself as he rattled off what these were. And what went through my head was a whole bunch of stuff like, why are you putting all of that on that list? Like, move a file from one place to the other. Like, it would take me longer to type that task in and put it in the tool than it would to actually do it. So you're tracking way, 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 way too much here. But you haven't chosen the big overarching things that you are going to focus on. Like, that's the main problem. I think you and I both, Mike, have over time stopped tracking so much stuff to do and have borderline just moved to tracking big projects and let the other stuff work itself out. That might be because of the whole habit focus that you and I tend to have. But
I think
yes.
That's linked, to be honest. And I think it's the right approach as I read this book.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
If you're going to try to manage all your tasks in a task management system, that's fine. I mean, there's stuff that needs to be done at a specific time. Attach a deadline to it. Use your computer to surface the right things at the right time. I understand all of that. There's a lot of value in that. That's what computers are good for. But I also don't feel quite as bad about not needing that in order to get my work done. And in the back of my mind, a year ago, I was thinking to myself, well, am I really working the right way if I don't have all these things managed in a task manager and I don't have like this proof that I'm shipping these things? But ultimately, the proof is that the stuff gets out there. There's an output to a lot of the work that I do. And so I'm okay with not having all of that stuff in neat little buckets that the computer can recognize, because ultimately what it's supposed to do is help me do the right thing at the right time, which I think is what Oliver Burkeman would say. That's the goal of anything. Later in the part 2, he talks about the moments, and we'll get into stuff like that. But as it pertains to what's the right thing to do right now, this kind of gets into the next point. So the third bullet I got here is getting better at procrastinating. I recall the Procrastinate on Purpose book that we read by Rory Vaden, and I know neither of us really liked that book a ton. But as I was reading this chapter 4 on becoming a better procrastinator, it reminded me of that book and made me realize there is an argument to be made for this. Not that I want to go back and reread it, but I feel like this does add more validity to Rory Vaden's approach. I think you and I both kind of bristled at the fact of like procrastinate. That's a bad thing, and there is bad procrastination, which is refusing to confront your limitations. That's how Oliver Burkeman defines it. And I thought that was great. I'd never heard it described that way. But when I read that, I was like, yes, that makes perfect sense.
I was going to say, that's the piece that I think I resonated the most with in this first part, was that I oftentimes don't act on things because I feel like I have to choose, or I feel like I'm not going to do it very well, or that I don't have the skills, or I'm not going to be able to complete it in the amount of time I have. Like, there's so many different ways you can come at this, but I tend to procrastinate on things in a bad way because I haven't confronted some of that finitude, or that lack of willingness to find or dedicate time, however you want to say it. I don't even know how to reference this stuff anymore now, Mike. But you get what I'm saying. Like, I don't know how to, like, I haven't confronted any of those. Like, I haven't embraced that mentality that I have a finite amount of time here. So then I do procrastinate, which seems backwards when you first, like, when I'm saying this, like, I feel like, well, obviously that would be a great motivator, wouldn't it? It's like, well, actually it's a demotivator, and I don't understand how that actually happens, but Oliver seems to get it. But this is one of those points where I worked through this, and the way he explained it made a lot of sense, but trying to re-articulate it is the challenge here, because I feel like he phrased it really, really well in the book.
He did. He said that the goal of time management is helping you neglect the right things. And that's the phrase that harkened back to Rory Vaden's book for me, because that was all about the thing that is really important, do that. Everything else, procrastinate. And when you think about it in that simple terms, it sounds ridiculous. Like, why in the world would you do that? It sounds really stressful. But it's only stressful, I think, if you're trying to do all the things. And even I think there's a distinction to be made between trying to do all the things and feeling pressure to complete all the things. He tells in this chapter the story of Frank Kafka, who fell in love with this lady, and he had a career as a banker. He wanted to get married. He wanted to be a writer, and he kind of bounced back and forth between all these things. He was engaged. He broke it off. He was engaged again. And this guy just sounds completely miserable because he's not okay with giving up any of the possibilities. It's like, if I were to continue to hold on to the hope that someday I will be a professional athlete because I played sports in college, right? That ship has sailed. And sometimes you think about that and you're like, aw, that's kind of sad. I used to really like basketball and tennis and all these things. But actually, it's only sad for a second. And then you're like, nah, it's way better now. And even that statement, I recognize, like, that's kind of a confirmation bias, and like, I'm happy with the way the things turned out, and maybe not everybody is. Maybe you do beat yourself up over, I had this door that I could have walked through and maybe I should have. But Oliver Burkeman would say, essentially, just come to terms with the fact that that door is closed, close it and move on. Don't continue to dredge that up in the past. Just, you've made your choice, stick with your choice. Stick with it until the conclusion of it, if this is really something that's important to you, and don't just be tossed back and forth between all of these different competing priorities. And that's, I understand, a lot easier said than done. But he also talks in this chapter about the reality of that big rock analogy, is that you've got more big rocks than you can fit in your jar. So don't scrutinize, did I eliminate the right rock? Just fit the things in there that you can, chuck the ones that don't, and move on. There'll be other opportunities. There'll be other options that present themselves. I feel like that's something that we stress out about is, well, this might be my one shot at doing something important or big or rewarding or whatever. No, it's not. You can't see down the road, and you can't see where the other doors are gonna open, but it's not, once you make this choice, you live with it for the entirety of your human existence. You are going to have more flexibility and more options to reevaluate things in the future.
Yeah, I feel like you're skirting around the piece in this chapter about settling.
Yes.
And how settling is generally thought of as a negative thing. Like when I say the word settle, my guess is in your mind you're thinking, oh, you didn't get the best. Well, maybe, but I also have to keep in mind that by not settling, and in this case not choosing, as is the story for Kafka, by not settling, you are settling. Like you're choosing not to settle, and thus prolonging. So you can see this with people who don't settle down and get married, who don't settle on a specific partner, that always like there might be somebody else that's better out there, and they move in together. You learn a lot about the other person. You realize, well, there's not this perfect combination of qualities in this person, but I'm sure that exists somewhere else. So I'm going to move on and then not settle. That's an extreme version. Like you can take it so many other ways, like artists not settling to ship something, like always perfecting something and never turning it loose. Not settling into a specific career, but always choosing different jobs and floating from thing to thing. Like that's the same concept. You're not settling down to that one thing. But at the same time, and I know there are like some information gatherers and people like want to research all the things and learn everything there is about that. My wife does this. Will check every review, wants to know every option, and wants to get the absolute best in something. It's like, that's okay in some things, but in absolutely everything, it's paralyzing. And you end up spending all of your time in that research mode and trying to find the best thing, which is sad, honestly, if you start really diving into it. How much time are you spending? How much effort are you putting into that when you could have made the decision early on and probably be just as happy with something that you quote unquote settled on and didn't spend all that time putting the effort into it? So I really love that part. Like, maybe that's just me who tends to jump to decisions very, very quickly. It's like that one, like I can change my mind later, but that one, like,
yep,
I do that very quickly.
Yeah, and that he would argue that's the right approach, because you're right. The whole settling issue, he talks about how the person who is always looking for a better romantic partner actually does not get the depth of the human relationship that they are craving by settling for someone and staying married to them for 50 years. And that's just one example. You did a great job of listing a whole bunch of other arenas where this could manifest. But I also feel like this kind of leads into the fourth point here too. So the fourth thing in the outline is distractions and avoiding limitations. Because if you are constantly looking for better options, like you were talking about your wife always doing the research, and I do the research too. And the thing with doing the research is you always think, well, there's got to be like one other option, one other product somewhere that falls in this sweet spot of this thing that I know exactly what I'm looking for, that's going to check all of the boxes. And if you can never quite get there, I'll just continue to research and I'll know exactly what I'm looking for, but I'll never be able to get it. Right. So that is not a great solution, especially when you combine that with chapter 5. He talks about the watermelon problem, and that gets into social media and all that kind of stuff. There's a quote in there from Tristan Harris. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this particular piece of it, but every time you open a social media app, he says there are 1,000 people on the other side of the screen paid to keep you there. And that's exactly what happens with the online research. As soon as you start researching that stuff, pretty soon you see the ads from your Amazon searches, and every single Google search you do, every single website you visit, you see those ads for those things that you saw that one time and you were considering. And hey, don't you think you really ought to get this thing? You need this thing, So this is a pretty insidious how all of this stuff works with our brains that are craving the distractions. And it's interesting because chapter 6, he talks about the reason that we seek these distractions is because they help us cope with our finitude, not in a good way, but that's what we do. Because when we are looking for the distractions when we are considering all the options, right? That's how we frame it in a positive way. We're doing our research because no one wants to make an uninformed decision and waste their money or their time or whatever. So we'll waste all of our time and money doing all the research. That appears in the moment to remove our limits. And I can totally see how we trick ourselves into thinking that, but ultimately his point is that distractions are just the places that we go to seek relief from the discomfort of confronting our own limitations. So again, he's not beating around the bush here at all. He's just saying the issue is you're not going to be able to do all the things, so just deal with it.
Or you may not feel like you can do them well enough.
Sure, yeah.
I know he brought that point out here too. And in that, like, if you've got a task that you don't feel like you're well suited to do at the level that you want to do it, that can then lead you to trying to find a distraction as well. I recently did this with, and I didn't know I was doing it, but I found myself, oddly enough, on social media more than I normally was. And I was in my email inbox a lot more than normal. And having read this section recently, I kind of paused. It's like, okay, why am I bouncing from thing to thing? And it occurred to me that I had a video that I needed to edit for a Sunday morning announcement, which is kind of a rah-rah sort of thing. And I needed to get that video edited, but I hadn't figured out what story to tell with the footage that I had for it. I'd already collected all the interview footage I needed for it, and I had all the B-roll and stuff I needed for it, but I was not certain of what story to tell with what I had. I didn't know how to put that together. Instead of spending time trying to figure out how to do that and actually looking through it all and just kind of formulating a plan, it was way easier to just acknowledge or try to escape that and spend time in a world other than the real world here and assume that I've got an infinite amount of time to do that and just put it off. Well, I ended up getting it done like 2 days before it needed to be done, which was like the absolute latest it possibly could get done. And that was the only reason it got done at that time. But in retrospect, looking at that, it was more my concern with not doing a good job on the video, not knowing what to do, not defining any of that, and then just trying to ignore that fact by stepping somewhere else and finding any distraction I could possibly find to put off doing it at all.
That's the uncomfortable part, right? Because chapter 5 is all about the machine that's designed to steal your attention, but then he ends it by saying, much of the time we give in to distraction willingly.
Oh yeah, I sought it out. Yes.
Yep. And we've all been there where we were procrastinating on this thing we know we need to do, and then the minute that we decide to do it, it takes way less time than we thought, and we beat ourselves up. Why was I putting this thing off so much? But in chapter 6, he kind of explains why that is. He says, more often than not, we don't feel like doing what needs doing, but we're attracted to the things that don't. And I feel this statement maybe flies in the face of some of the dopamine-driven, eat the ice cream, not the frog first stuff that I have heard in terms of the ADHD stuff. And I don't know enough to speak to this directly, but I hear Oliver Burkeman saying this, and I feel like maybe this is forcing everybody at some level to recognize the fact that, you're never going to make that thing look attractive enough to do it every single time something that needs doing. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I've recently gone through your podcast with, I don't remember his name.
Jesse Anderson.
About ADHD. Yeah, so as of like the last week, I finished going through that podcast that you did with Sparky and him. And obviously, like, I resonate with Jesse a lot on it. And I know that having read this now and gone through this part at least, maybe a week ago now, that for me, seeing all of these distractions, being aware that, like, because one of the big tenets of ADD is that we're time blind. Like, there's now and not now. That's really how I tend to think of time, even though that's completely absurd. Like, the whole planning ahead thing is just something I'm terrible at, and I know a lot of ADHD people are like that. And at the same point, like, going through this and realizing like how I tend to seek out distractions, like, there's the whole dopamine thing, like, ADHD brains don't produce as much, so you tend to seek out more of it than most people. And just knowing that so many things go through my brains. Like one that could be an actual chemical imbalance that needs to be helped. But I also can't help but process the thought that there might be some training that has caused that as well. I don't know that that's true. I'm not I'm not a neuroscientist, of course, but I can't help but think that there's maybe some behavioral things that have led to that over time, and trying to fight against that could be helpful. Now, obviously, if you want to be completely point blank, fighting against it really wouldn't hurt anyone, but I feel like the ADD brain has a little bit more to fight against by default.
Sure.
And me personally, just knowing that whenever I'm if I find myself distracting myself, this at least has taught me to try to ask the question, why am I feeling like I have infinite time right now? And that's not true. And trying to confront that, that little questioning piece right there, at least has helped me in the last week. I don't know if that'll stand over time, of course, but I feel like this is at least touching on that territory. It's kind of like what I was talking about early on with the follow-up of self-control and ADHD. Like, there's something here that connects those. I don't know that I've processed it quite well enough to be able to say definitively, like in my case, what that means, but I know there's at least a connection here. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but
yeah, no, I think if I could summarize it, basically what you're saying is that maybe the ADHD brain versus a neurotypical brain, the ADHD brain does have a little bit more of an obstacle to overcome, but ultimately it sounds like the thing is not to remove the unpleasantness of the task, because if Oliver Burkeman is right, you're never going to do that anyways. So do what you can to make things more attractive, get the dopamine hit, whatever, but also recognize that you're never going to make it completely go away, because as Oliver Burkeman says,
right.
You're going to find it unpleasant constraining your focus to what matters no matter what. And I think
Yes.
that's the thing that kind of bothered me, not about the book, but just about the whole idea of finding the thing, do what you love, you never have to work a day in your life, that whole sort of a thing. Because the minute that you go from doing something for fun to doing something for a job, you find yourself resisting doing the thing because you have to instead of you get to, which sounds ridiculous. The task itself hasn't changed at all. And so I've been thinking about that, like, why is that? And I think Oliver Burkeman kind of nails it right there.
I had a lot of those where it's like, I've been trying to, I've been processing, thinking about things around this for a long time. And then Burkeman just comes in and oh, here's what's going on. Oh, thanks for that, dude.
Yep. And then also, I think that kind of sets the stage for the next thing here. So let's go into part 2, which is beyond control. And the first point I jotted down was enjoying the moment versus capturing for the future, which is kind of getting at what we were sort of just talking about now versus doing something maybe distasteful right now because it's going to give you future benefit, future gain. I think of the Dave Ramsey quote, pay now, play later, or play now, pay later. And Oliver Burkeman, I think, would take issue with that statement because that's the traditional approach. And we can fall into this trap where we'll do these things now because it's going to set us up for that moment in the future when we transition from where we are now to where we finally think we should be. And once we arrive, then things will get easier. That when I finally arrive mind, there's actually a name for that, which I discovered when I was doing some research for a recent Focused episode. It's called arrival fallacy. You've got that point, that destination. Once I finally do this thing, then everything is just going to smooth out and the path forward is going to become clear. And that never happens. So Oliver Burkeman would say, quit putting off all of the enjoyment of now and just kicking the can down the road, believing that at some point it's all going to click into place and you'll be happy. Figure out how to be happy in the moment. Figure out how to live for now, because you can never be truly certain of the future. Now, this got me thinking. And one of the things he talks about in chapter 8, which is titled "You Are Here," is the Rosetta Stone at some Egyptian museum. And it sounds like he was there and he saw all these people walking by it, taking pictures of it with their phones so they could remember it later. And just thinking to himself, they're missing it now. And I kind of thought maybe the place to jump off here in terms of this discussion of being in the moment versus being in the future is just that specific scenario. Do you tend to be the type of person who just enjoys the moment? Maybe your kids are doing something goofy and you're just going to soak in the expression on their faces? Or are you, I got to capture this because I'll look at these pictures years later and I'll really be glad that I have these?
Yeah, I actually have to have this conversation a lot, which is weird. But if you run AV for funerals, this conversation comes up frequently because what's the very first thing that happens when you walk into a funeral or like a visitation of sorts? There's always the slideshow, right? There's always the looping pictures, videos of the deceased. And that never struck me, like this point of enjoying the moment versus capturing for the future, that has never struck me as profoundly as it did when I ran sound for the funeral of a 7-year-old little girl. And Mom and Dad brought me a thumb drive with 800 photos of her on that thumb drive. And they wanted them to be played, and they said they hopefully wanted to get through it a couple times before the service started. I normally put pictures on loop at like 7 seconds, like it's up for 7 seconds, and then it goes on to the next. If you work out the math on that, you don't have time to go through that but like once in the span of a visitation. And it occurred to me whenever I was walking through that and talking through it with them, it's like, I have too many here to share. And they're like, well, those are all of our important moments. I'm not arguing that. I'm disconnected from what the meaning is of those photos. I'm purely from a technological stance telling you that we need to make your visitation twice as long if you want to go through that whole thing twice. That prompted a whole conversation about should we have taken so many pictures, which is not a conversation I want to be in with a set of parents who just lost their 7-year-old girl, of them trying to decide, did they take too many pictures versus enjoying those moments? And I definitely float on, when it comes to kids anyway, I float on the side of enjoying the moment maybe a bit far, because I regularly find myself, like Becky will ask me, like, do you have some pictures that we could put in a Christmas card? Like, I think I took a picture of the girls about a month ago.
The struggle is real. We went through the same thing.
Yeah, I don't. And it's not because I don't want pictures of my kids. It's just that I'm too busy playing with them or doing something with them that it feels weird to take my phone out and take pictures of them. And so as far as kids go, I definitely find myself like in the moment. Where this shifts gears is when you start thinking about like how I've, along with my wife, like how we have set up our life just in general. Because so much of what we've decided to do now versus later is like putting off fun things or things we would do as a family, or putting off, I'm drawing a blank on what those would be right now. We put off decisions for later because we're waiting for something to arrive. Like, we're going to have more time in the future for jumping on the trampoline after we get this project done. Like, well, when that project's done, we're going to add 2 more probably. So that's never going to happen. So go jump on the trampoline now. Like, that's I think something that I struggle with, is choosing what those projects are, not so much like capturing. But like you're saying, the Rosetta Stone piece, that slaps you in the face with the thing of like, do you embrace the nature you're around versus taking pictures of it? I'm talking too long right now, but yes, I think you get my point.
Yeah, I think I probably am in the same camp as you are, where I don't document stuff people might argue enough. And as a result, I don't have a huge photo library that I can go back through. But also, I'm not through it yet, but I don't have any remorse or regret like I missed a section of my kids' lives because I've done my best to redeem as much time as I can in each stage. And I am, for whatever weird reason, completely okay with them growing up and walking into the next one. I don't have that like, oh, I wish they would stay little because I really like the way Adelaide can't say marshmallow, so she says farm fellow, and it's really cute. And I don't ever want that to change. Like, it's going to change, but the next season's going to
Yep.
be special in its own right. And I think if I was so attached to preserving the way things currently are and not forgetting this memory, I would be pulling out my phone more often and trying to record those little moments. Part of it, I think, is every time I try to do that, the moment is immediately over for me because my kids are all like, I want to see.
Exactly. You can't take a picture of it because the whole thing's done after that. They want to see what the picture turned out
So
as.
let's just enjoy it for what it is. And I think that's kind of what Oliver Burkeman would advise. He also says in chapter 8, he calls a casual catastrophe, which is the belief that the proof of rightness or wrongness of some way of bringing up your kids is the kind of adult that it produces. And he uses a couple of extreme examples on opposite ends for this, which I thought was pretty effective the way that he did it. I also have to wrestle with myself. I want to be in the moment. I want to enjoy the process and not procrastinate, for lack of a better term, on, well, the real payoff is going to be when they're adults and they've left home and they have what they need to make their own decisions. But if I'm real with myself, I don't know how you avoid falling into that sort of thing. I don't know that it's necessarily bad to fall into that sort of thing. I think it's okay to think about that. I think the line is where if that's all the value and you just continually put off today in belief that it's going to produce a better tomorrow. And there's a couple different factors that go into this. The previous chapter, he talks about worry, and worry is the mind's attempt to generate a feeling of security about the future. Consider all the options, right? Worst case scenario, all that kind of stuff. But then also, I think you can apply this outside of the kid context in just the habits and the routines that you embrace. So the next point on the outline here is hiking for hiking's sake, because he talks about that as the thing where you're going to go and you're going to hike and there is no end goal for, I'm going to become a better hiker. Whereas for me, for example, when I started running, it was so that I could run a half marathon. And I have shared before about how my whole thinking on that has changed, and it's not prepping for a race. It's learning to enjoy the process, being in the moment. But when he's talking about hiking, I immediately thought of you and your hikes in the morning/evening. Are you still doing those?
Yeah. Took the dog out this morning.
Yep.
Planning to do so tonight, but it gets cold sometimes, but I still do it.
Does get cold, but is he defining that accurately in chapter 9 when he's talking about rediscovering rest, where you just do it because you enjoy doing it, and maybe you enjoy different things about it. Maybe you enjoy the fresh air. Maybe you do feel you enjoy the cold, the brisk walks, before it gets really freezing here in the Midwest. Maybe it's the clarity that comes from just thinking about things as you feel the crunch of the leaves underneath your feet or whatever, but I'm kind of curious if you don't mind kind of elaborating on this process and what it is you enjoy about it, and how that's, as I'm assuming this is one way that you're kind of practicing what he's talking about here.
Yeah, and if we go to last week, there was a perfect day that illustrates this. There was a day that I got up and I don't always check the weather before I go outside to see what temperature it is. I usually step outside, see what it feels like, and then that dictates, is this a scarf morning? Is this a throw 7 layers of something over my head morning? Like, that's kind of what I decide. And that morning I stepped out, and it's like it was cold. There was a slight breeze, which made it even worse. And I went and threw another fleece line something over top of what I had on, threw on a scarf, ski mask, the whole thing, and then grabbed the dog, and we went for a walk out in the back of the woods. When I got back, I found out it was -13 that morning when I went outside. So the wind chill, I think, was -19, something like
Boy.
that. It was cold. It was a cold one. But it didn't occur to me until after I got back that I guess it was super cold. But what I find is when I go on those walks, and this is why I find myself doing it regardless of weather. I even went out one morning when it was raining, and I do it because, one, I like going for the walk. It's fun to take the dog out. He loves getting out. He doesn't get to, like, he can go in the backwoods like that, but he won't on his own because he's 8 pounds, a little scared of the woods, I guess. So he likes to go out with you, and I like taking him out. But there's all sorts of things happen. One, it calms my brain. Two, it's similar to, there's a story later on where they talk. There's an art teacher who has their students pick a piece of art and go stare at it for 3 hours.
I love that. Yeah.
Which I love the concept. I don't want to do that, by the way. Like, I would love to have done it, but I don't want to do it. But there's something along those lines that happens when you go out into the same set of woods on the same set of trails every single day. And one of those is similar to what you and I've talked about in the past. You learn what's going on so you know when things are out of order and what to do with them. Like, this is why you power washed your house, right? You saw that it was dirty and you didn't realize it was dirty until you walked around every day. That thing does happen when you walk these trails. But also you start to notice things that have been there the whole time. You just didn't realize they were there. I noticed this morning when I went out that there's a cedar tree off in a corner of the woods that I hadn't noticed before. I've walked these woods well over 100 times now and have never noticed this tree, which is in the corner of the lot that I walk within 15 feet of. It's like, that's what I'm talking about. Like, you start to see things more, and that's enjoyable. Like, there's something with that that's fun to just always explore new things. Like he says in this chapter, in this section, it's like, you're never going to be a top-notch hiker. Like, you can't be the best at hiking. Like, it's walking. Like, from the time you're 4, you've pretty much got the art of walking mastered. Like, this is just the way it is. So hiking is something that people do not necessarily to get better at hiking, but because they like hiking. You know, another example is I had the electrical contractor that came into our house to do the inspections. I got to talking to him about completely non-electrical things, but he was explaining how he burns wood for heat in his house. And one of his favorite things to do is split wood. Like, people talk about how that's such a waste of time. You shouldn't be burning wood, blah, 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 blah. But it gets you outside. It gives you space to think. It gives you a physical activity to do. And it's okay to just like doing that. As much as we like to bemoan physical labor that's like that, it can be fun for its own sake. I don't know if this is answering what you're after, but I know that the walks that I go on, at least once a day, if not twice a day, generally it's twice a day, they have so many different aspects to it that it's hard to say how much value is in them, because it's also just fun. It's just something I like doing. It's okay. Like, I don't feel like it has to have some productive rationale behind it, even though I think it does, and I could probably justify it that way. But
I think he would. I think he would
fun.
agree with you, because in chapter 9 he talks about, and this is one of the things I jotted down to my mind note file: why do we feel the need to defend our leisure in terms of productivity?
Yes, we totally do. Like, even us with reading books, right? Like, well, we get good lessons out of those, like, but it's fun.
Yep. And that can be enough if it's fun. And that's kind of the difference between a real hobby and, I guess, what Mike Hurley would call a jobby. Something that you do for fun, but you also get, in his terms, he gets paid for it. Like the Pen Addict podcast, for example, is a jobby. He likes fountain pens, but the fact that he has this podcast, they do sponsors and things like that, that changes the interaction with the hobby itself for him. And that's why he's gotten into mechanical keyboards and doesn't want to start a mechanical keyboards podcast, because he likes the disconnect there of having this thing not have the pressure to be producing something. And I feel like that is very legitimate. Hobbies, Oliver Burkeman says, are free from the pressure to be good at them. So proficiency does not matter. You can just enjoy chopping wood. You can enjoy going for a hike. And I feel like this is one of those things that I need to spend some time considering. Where can I make some adjustments and just enjoy doing the thing as opposed to trying to be good at it? One of the areas that I've been forced to make that adjustment is in running, because I realized after my first or second race, I am not fast. I am not built to be a runner. So I am never going to win. And that is completely fine just because I enjoy doing it. But I feel like there are other areas where I can just enjoy the process and not feel like I need to be good at it. And so one of my one action item from this entire book comes from chapter 8. And again, these kind of link together. But as it pertains to the hobbies and the disconnect of producing some future outcome, I feel like working out falls into this too, where people, I'm going to suffer through the workout because I'm going to lose the weight in the future. And I've been working out long enough now that I actually just enjoy going to work out. And after breaking my hand, there are a bunch of things that I couldn't do. And it really was kind of frustrating me. I bought myself, by the way, recently, these lobster gloves. You familiar with these?
No.
Do a Google search for lobster gloves. You'll see a whole bunch of examples. And basically they are gloves that allow you to have your fingers like together like this. So I have to have my two fingers taped together still. And I haven't been able to go running because running gloves all are like individual fingers with a flap that you fold over them. So I found this pair of running gloves that is lobster gloves so I can have my fingers bunched together in these mitten type things and go running. And again, first time I've gone running now in several weeks, not fast, slower than I was. I am out of shape, but it felt so good. And I'm kind of being forced with this finger injury to a whole bunch of stuff that I was used to doing. I wasn't able to do anymore. Playing guitar is another one, which I'm not going to be Jimi Hendrix or Eric Clapton, but it's just something I really enjoy doing, and I haven't been able to do it for a while. And so not being able to do certain things for a while has forced me to change my approach to them and really look forward to just the act of being able to play some chords again on my guitar. I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm hoping that I don't lose that. So the action item here is, how am I in future chasing mindset and what can I do about it?
Yeah, that's a tough one too. Because like we were talking about, if you're capturing for the future, like that's fairly easy to see. But when you're always making decisions based on what the future will be, like that's the whole businessman and the Mexican fisherman story that comes out. It's like, well, what are you doing all day? It's like, well, I work for a couple hours and then I, lay around and, play songs and drink wine. And this story. The businessman says, well, you could do so much more. You can make so much, buy some boats. And then, after you retire, then you can, lay around and play music and drink wine and such. Like that's essentially what you're saying. Is like, if you're always looking towards the future and putting off the things, like, yes, I don't have to reiterate this, do I?
He does tell that a version of that story in this book too. But one of the things that I appreciated about this book was Oliver kind of alludes to some of these stories without having to retell all the details. And the way he explains them, he has a very specific angle he's approaching it from. And there's no misconstruing what he actually thinks about that particular story.
Yes. Yeah, he does have a lot of stories he doesn't actually tell.
Yeah, and which is fine because I think he's kind of assuming you've heard this before. And I want to just use that as a foundation for a point that's actually wrong. There's a different way to do this. One of the stats I thought was kind of crazy was that the average country dweller in the 16th century only worked about 150 days per year, which sounds like, well, that's not as much as normal people, but still, that doesn't seem like a whole lot of time off. And then you think about 365 days in a year. Yeah, you're working less than half of the year. And that sounds amazing.
Yep, it does. Becky and I just had this conversation about being able to do different tasks at different points in the day, and how, like, whenever I'm doing work at the church and on the computer, like, noon is my cutoff. Like, if I'm not done with like making things or working on the computer by noon, it's not going to happen in the afternoon. So afternoons, I can easily do like something like this where I've got somebody else on, like in this case, we're on the computer together. Like I can do that because somebody else is involved and we can bounce things back and forth. That works great. But if I'm not with someone else, then I've got to make sure I'm pulling cable, terminating cables, building stages. Like I've got to do something physical or I'm done. Like I cannot keep going in the afternoon. And this came up because Becky said basically the same thing. Like I can do all the schoolwork stuff with the kids. I can do all sorts of these things. But if I'm going to do, some of my hobby stuff in the afternoon and it's not like something physically taxing, like just can't. Like doing bills and taxes and stuff in the afternoon just is not going to happen. So there's something about that cutoff around noon that happens, and it's all about just choosing when to do things. How did I get on that? I don't even know where I got that from.
I think that's an interesting topic, though. I know there's books written about that specific thing.
Oh yeah,
choosing
definitely.
the right time to do things. I hadn't thought of it from that angle. The big point he's making, which resonated with me, is that we really could do with more leisure and more rest because we don't live to work, we work to live. And if you are viewing your time off as simply a way of recharging for the work, you're kind of missing the point. And it sounds obvious when you state it that way, but I found myself, if I'm honest, kind of slipping into that as I was reading. I'm like, yeah, I could be a little bit more in the moment and just enjoy the time off. And timing is great because as we record this end of the year, I got 2 weeks off, week of Christmas and New Year's, largely a few little projects like this one, recording Bookworm. But so it's given me a lot to think about, and a lot to think about, not just in terms of my own leisure, but the next point in the outline is this whole idea of FICA and social time management. Do you know what the word FICA means?
No, I was trying to recall. I was looking it up. I was like, where did that come from? Did that come from here? Or did you put this in? I don't
It
recall
actually
it.
comes from here, but it resonates with me because there is actually a tea bar in Appleton that I like called FICA. And so they have the definition plastered on the wall, which is basically to enjoy a cup of tea or coffee, whatever, with friends. And the point that he makes in the book is it's a Swedish term, I believe, and he couples it very effectively, I would say, in chapter 12, The Loneliness of a Digital Nomad, with this Swedish study that showed that people's happiness increased not just from taking vacation, but also how many other people took vacation at the same time. So in other words, people were happier when other people were vacationing at the same time they were, so that they could do things together. And so he defines a Swedish fika as a coordinated break where everyone shares coffee and cake. And at whatever time in the afternoon, I assume it's kind of probably like this a little bit. I know I have some friends who have gone to London, and they mentioned, there's this specific tea time. Everybody has tea at this specific time. And as a tourist, there's limited value in that because you're just breaking when everybody else is. If you actually live there, I think it's a little different because you're on a break, your buddy's on a break, and so you end up just talking about things and enjoying that time together, and not feeling the pressure like I've got 10 minutes before I have to get back to my job, which is probably the American version of this. Is we work 8 hours a day, and you have a 10-minute break in the morning, 10-minute break in the afternoon, and 30 minutes for lunch. And your boss is breathing down your neck if you take any longer than that. And based on this description here in chapter 12, I feel like the Swedes would probably think we're crazy because this is a big, important part of their day.
Yeah, I recalled the whole thing with timing of tasks earlier. It had to do with what you're talking about with leisure. And it's because like if they had the 150 days that they worked in the year, that they're really only using about half the year, which would mean that if you really get good work in half the day, you're kind of doing the same thing. But that also can translate into what we're talking about here with social time management, because there's so much of the work that we do when you stop and you do lunch together. Like if your company does a dedicated time for a lunch break, which where I work does not, everybody does it whenever they want. But whenever you do that, you end up building friendships and you have that social aspect, and thus happiness goes up, or in the Swedish study, antidepressant use goes down,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was a fascinating way to figure that out. It's like antidepressant use drops whenever holidays happen. I suppose that makes sense, but it also happens, like it goes down the more people that are having that holiday. So if it's just like a random weekend that you have with your family, that's one thing. But if you have like a Christmas season, it goes down even more. So like those are things that, I suppose we kind of know this, but it's really, really interesting that comes out in this section about a digital nomad, because like that's, at least in tech circles, like that concept is almost elevated to the point where like this is the dream.
Yep, living
right?
the dream.
Like, this is the thing that people shoot for.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to be able to work from anywhere, whenever I want. But talk to the people who do that or have done it for even just 1 year, and you'll hear about how lonely that experience is, because you don't have schedules, you don't have people who do it with you. You're always in someplace new, and you don't have deep-rooted connections. This is actually one reason that my wife and I are staying in the area that we're at in Minnesota, and trying to get us to move from it would be very, very difficult, because even 7-8 years ago, we debated moving to areas where there's more family, but even then we had decided like we've got friendships here, we're happy with where we're at, and we're just going to send deep, deep roots here, because we made that choice to send roots deep instead of shallow and wide, for the sake of having a more, I guess, involved life and a more full life. That's kind of the way that we would term it. But it's not easy to do that. You have to fight through some difficult things. You have to go through not fun things with other friends. But that's the point. Like that's why. That's the good thing. I'm sorry if I described your life, Blake. Digital nomad. I don't want to be one.
Well, this is very uncomfortable for me, because I am, maybe surprising to people who listen to podcasts, but I am extremely introverted. And for a long time, I thought like that was the ideal. Like I'm on vacation and nobody else is. I don't have to talk to anybody. Yes, that's a win.
Perfect. Awesome. Put that in the success column. Let's move on.
Yeah. I don't think that's true. And I don't think that reading this book was the tipping point for me in that, but I've kind of slowly been coming to this realization that community is much more important than I initially thought it was. And so this is just one more brick in the wall, a layer in that argument for me, but very articulately communicated that as much as I don't want necessarily my personality to be reliant on other people or be around other people, that is ultimately why I'm here. This is kind of getting back to life purpose, mission statement stuff for me, and recognizing that I cannot do that if I am a complete loner living in a cabin in the middle of the woods.
Right. Yep.
So I'm slowly coming around to the fact that, this is just going to become part of the process for me. And that's okay, because at the heart of this is this balance where we want control over our time, right? That's the whole digital nomad thing, is I can work when I want, where I want. But also the whole social fika thing is this whole concept of communal time management. We all have to coordinate our schedules so we can all take off together. And those are not compatible ideas. There's just some give and take here, and you have to kind of balance these two things. And I feel like in the past I've erred too far on the side of, well, I'm just going to do my thing, and never completely, by the way. I'm not a digital nomad. We're very involved with our church. And so that one commitment means that my schedule is not my own. And sometimes I think in the past, maybe I've resented that. I wish that I could stack these things around different time slots, yada, yada, yada. I don't really feel that way anymore. And I think this chapter and this section of the book kind of explained to me why I'm starting to come around on that.
Yeah, I'll put my hat in the camp of hyper introverted. You wouldn't really know that. Even people who see me on Sunday morning think I'm extroverted. Like, you got me so wrong. Like, nope. On the other end of the spectrum. Definitely on the other end. So it's not something I want to go do. Like, even simple things like having another couple over for dinner. I naturally won't do that at all. But my wife loves to do that. And I'm aware that I always love having that happen. But I always think I don't want it, even though it's exactly what I want. So yep. I always have to tell myself, like, if I just start that process, I will be very happy that I did it. It's okay to be around other people. They're not scary. So I have to remind myself these things.
I do too. Last thing that I wanted to talk about here, and there's a lot more that we could talk about, by the way, but this is the one that really jumped out to me, and this is kind of the whole theme towards the end of the book here, is that the universe doesn't care how well you manage your time. We kind of alluded to this a little bit at the beginning, how your life in the big scheme of things is less important than you think it is. And that can be unsettling, but ultimately it's a good thing. And there's a whole chapter here, chapter 13, called Cosmic Insignificance Therapy, which basically is about how doubting what you're doing with your life, while it's unsettling at first, is actually not a bad thing. This is when things seem to be too much, you find solace in the fact that none of it really matters all that much. And maybe that's a little bit hard to understand, but if I were to try to summarize this myself, it's basically all of the things that you think you have to do because they're so important. If they don't get done, it's not going to cause the universe to break. And so they're really less important than you make them out to be. And again, I've been practicing this before you read the book because I broke my hand. And all the things that I thought, oh, well, I need to do this and I need to do that, I can't do them now. And you know what? It's okay. I haven't been able to play guitar on the worship team. And as much as I miss being up there playing my guitar, worship team is doing just fine without me.
Isn't that maddening?
I should be careful how I say that, because I people have told me, oh, we really miss you, wish you were up there. And I understand that, but I go to the services, I'm down on the floor instead of up on the stage, and it's fine. It's jarring at first for me because it's a totally different perspective. Ultimately, I think it's a good thing because it's forcing me not to hide behind my instrument and the music so much. But, I guess the approach here is like, we tend to think we're super, super important. We'll never be replaced. You're replaceable, and that's okay. I mean, that's actually kind of the goal with discipleship and delegation, is you're going to train somebody up to do something so that it doesn't all have to be done by you anyways. And you can do a good job and participate in that process, or you can completely neglect it and people have to figure it out. But you know what? They're going to figure it out regardless.
Yeah, this particular chapter you're talking about, this cosmic insignificance therapy, this is one that Tim Ferriss, did you see this? He posted it to his podcast. They read it for that. I don't remember who read it. I didn't listen to the podcast, but I know it struck him enough that he says he had calm for a few days afterwards, just processing it. And it struck him so much, he talked to Oliver Burkeman and got his permission to post it. So if you want to listen to one of the chapters, you can do that. I also know, like, this is one that I understand that it's very helpful to have this mindset that it doesn't matter. At the same time, like, being Christian, I also struggle with that at the same point, because I feel like it does matter, because eternity. Do I need to explain this? But
yeah,
that's my viewpoint with it. So, like, on one hand, like, yep, absolutely. Whether or not I do get the leaves cleaned up on the lawn, it does not matter. It might frustrate my neighbors. It might frustrate me in the spring, but it really doesn't matter. At the same point, like what you choose to do big picture wise really does matter, I find. Whether it's going to have a huge impact on history, I'm not concerned about. I understand that some people are, that they're afraid of that insignificance. But I think maybe that's what he's getting at. As long as you're okay with the insignificance of your life as a whole, that part I could get on board with. But anyway, I think you understand what I'm getting
Yes.
at, listeners. I pray that you are. And coming back around to like that insignificance piece, like, yes, it's super refreshing to hear someone say, it doesn't matter, because every other systems book and stuff we've come like, it makes a big deal what you choose for your mission in life. And he's saying, no, it doesn't. So it's really helpful to have somebody on the other side of that yelling match stand up here. So it's a breath of fresh air, I think, in this case. So I'm grateful for what he did with this particular chapter in particular here.
Yeah, and this is where the whole idea I mentioned at the beginning, the Ecclesiastes approach, right? Everything is meaningless. This is in the Bible written by Solomon, in some ways the wisest man who ever lived, right? He wrote a lot of different sections of the Bible, and which reflect different portions of his life. You got the Song of Solomon, where you see his passion, and he writes Ecclesiastes. That's kind of like the bitter, at least in the past, that's what I've always thought, is like, this is the bitter old man, Solomon, saying none of this stuff really matters. But I have a different approach to that, having read this book, because having read it by Oliver Burkeman, instead of just dismissing that and never really leaning into it, I kind of wrestled with that question, like, how do you balance this stuff? And I think where I've landed is, yeah, ultimately in terms of measuring output, your life doesn't have as significant an impact as you think it does. And maybe part of this is American, by the way, because of the rugged individualism we have, and we think we're the center of the universe. Maybe in other cultures, other countries, this isn't such a big issue. But as it pertains to what you were alluding to, living the Christian life, dealing with the fact that, we're going to be held accountable for what we have done, I actually feel this is very freeing, because you aren't on the hook for the results, but you are on the hook, I would argue, for the intention. And it kind of reminded me of like the Daily Questions, Marshall Goldsmith, that from the book Triggers that we covered, which I still do my journaling that way. And it's simply, did I do my best to fill in the blank? If you do your best to make an impact in other people's lives, but then don't hold yourself responsible for the outcome of those people making what you consider to be the right choices, you can just do the thing, help the person, be in the moment, and then when you're done, you're done. And that actually sounds pretty awesome as I think about that. Like, I will do the best that I can in the time that I am here to redeem the time and live intentionally and do as much good as I can. But also, I'm not going to be constantly measuring and asking myself, have I done enough? Because what is enough? It's always going to be an arbitrary thing that I have arrived at. And as soon as you start measuring enough, you start comparing it to other people by the same measuring stick, and you see other people who are doing more, which gets you back into this rat race. So uncomfortable to be considering some of these ideas, but ultimately I think it's very healthy.
It's usually how it goes, I think. If you're willing to have a hard question that you're going to work through, or a difficult relationship or situation to work through, we don't like doing it, but you're almost universally better off once you come through it.
Yep. Agreed. Which I guess gets us to the afterword. This is titled Beyond Hope. And at the beginning of the afterword, it sounds very negative and depressing because it's continuing this theme. of the world is broken. Hope requires placing trust in something outside of yourself. And basically, I think he's kind of advising you not to do that. And I think that's where I would draw the line. But also, he kind of ends it very positively, I feel, by encouraging us to become okay with things not being okay. So only in terms of giving up hope is this negative if you are hoping that everything will be completely fixed within your lifetime. When you don't feel like it has to be, when you're just focused on doing the good that you can with the time that you have and making some impact, but not trying to fulfill a quota or achieve an outcome, that's ultimately a very freeing approach to life, I would argue.
Yes. Everything is meaningless. You also skipped over the questions, though.
I did skip over the
I think you'd do
questions. Should we run through these quick?
I don't know. Maybe we should tell people you got to buy the book from our link in order to do that.
Sure.
That would be mean. That would be mean. No, it's the last chapter of the book, which he titled The Human Disease. That's a, yeah. But he has 5 questions that are set up to help bring this all to a little more of a concrete realm, to use his terms for it. And I guess I'll just read these 5
Go for
questions. Where in your life or your work are you currently pursuing comfort when what's called for is a little discomfort? Not sure I want to answer that one. Number 2, are you holding yourself to and judging yourself by standards of productivity or performance that are impossible to meet? I will probably just answer that as yes, and then move on to the next one. In what ways have you yet to accept the fact that you are who you are, not the person you think you ought to be? That would be a hard one to confront. In which areas of life are you still holding back until you feel like you know what you're doing? That might be that settling piece. I mean, there's some of that in there as well. And then the last one, how would you spend your days differently if you didn't care so much about seeing your actions reach fruition? Which I think gets to, are you doing things just for the sake of doing them, as opposed to always having a value-driven reason for accomplishing something?
Yeah. I
Anyway.
think, the chapter 13, he talks about the Steve Jobs, leave your dent in the universe thing. And kind of he encourages us not to worry about leaving a dent in the universe. In the last chapter, he's encouraging us just to do the next right thing and to choose uncomfortable enlargement over comfortable diminishment whenever you can. And I love that phrase. I feel like you can apply your own meaning to that. It doesn't have to be a religious meaning necessarily, but be willing to be uncomfortable, but also be choosing to stay in the moment and not thinking long-term all the time.
Yeah, it brings you to it's okay to do things for the sake of doing them.
Yep. It's a very effective summary, I think.
Yeah, totally is. Yes.
Cool. Anything else?
No, I think we've got an hour 45 here or so as we're recording it anyway. So I think we're good.
All right. Well, let's go to action items then. I have one, which I recognized the moment that I saw the thing inspire me. I'm like, oh, this is one of those classic Mike action items that there's no way I'll be able to do. So I immediately thought, instead of having a generic action item where I don't know what sort of outcome will come from this, I thought I'll put this in the form of a question. And really the action item then is asking myself the question and seeing what comes out of it. So the question, which I already mentioned, how am I in future chasing mindset and what can I do about it? I'm going to spend a little bit of thinking time over the holidays considering that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I've got one as well, and that is to take those 5 questions that I just read to you, and I want to put those into like a monthly questioning period. And I know, Mike, you do like regular periodic questions that you'll answer, whether it's daily or so forth. I've not really done that outside of like a daily stance. So I thought about doing these on a daily stance, but I feel like that's going to get to be a bit much. Weekly stuff never seems to work out well for me, so I figured, well, the next chance I've got is monthly. So I'm putting together those in like a monthly template of sorts for some text files that I'll pull up and run through on a monthly basis. So that's my action item, is to get that all set up.
Cool. I like that a lot. All right. Style and rating. my book, so I'll go first. I am going to hesitantly rate this 5 stars. And the reason I say hesitantly is because I feel if you just read this book and you don't spend any time considering the questions that he poses here, there's a good chance this book will make you mad and rub you the wrong way. But I think there is a ton of good that can come from wrestling with some of these questions. Maybe this is something that I have grown into over the years, where the stuff that I disagree with or I'm uncomfortable with, instead of just dismissing it and I don't want to be around that anymore, I force myself to lean into it and get to the bottom of it. And again, I read this book at the right time because there was some other stuff going on in my life that kind of complemented this, but I feel very good about the resolution that I've come to having gone through this. I've talked a little bit about this book to my wife and planted some of the ideas, and the reaction is kind of exactly what I expected. I present the first thing he says, her eyes get real big, like, I can't believe that you think that's a good thing. And then I kind of explain some of the arguments. Oh yeah, I get that now. Like, oh, that's really good.
Yep. But I think you're crazy. Oh, wait, actually, that's pretty smart.
Yeah. So that's why I say hesitantly. If all you did was skip to this part of the podcast and listen to the reviews, and you're going to say, oh, Mike rated this 5 stars, I'm going to pick up this book because Mike recommended it. And you read the first couple pages, you're going to be like, why in the world is Mike recommending this book? But I think the value comes in wrestling with it. And I understand a lot of people don't just read through the whole book like you and I do for Bookworm. And if you don't do that, then don't even bother picking this one up, because you're not going to enjoy it at the beginning. But ultimately, I would argue this is one of those books where the ideas that are presented are really powerful, really important, and ultimately something I think everybody has to wrestle with. And we've heard over and over and over again, be in the moment, today's all you get. And I still have trouble trying not to get too far out into the future and thinking ahead too much, planning too much. I feel like this book was the right thing for the right time for me, and for the right person, it absolutely could be. I think there's a definite possibility that you pick this up, you're not in the right headspace to receive the message, and you just completely write it off. But I do think that everyone is going to come to this point where they're going to have to wrestle with this, not just when you get to a midlife crisis, by the way. I think that this book is very applicable no matter what stage of life you happen to find yourself in. If you're older, if you're younger, whatever. I do think this is a really good book. I think it's really well written. Oliver Burkeman's style in this book, I feel very, very effective. I don't remember liking his style all that much when we read The Antidote, but coupled with this message, I just felt like this is great. So I really enjoyed this book, and I think a lot of people should read it. But again, there's a caveat, a huge asterisk with this. Like, you got to go into it with an open mind. If you don't, there's a good chance you'll hate it.
I could see where you get the hesitation on it. I don't remember much of his style from The Antidote, but I know that, like, in this one, his style is spot on. I had a hard time putting it down, at least until I reached an existential crisis yet again and needed to separate from it emotionally, not because I needed to take a break from reading, but just I can't keep going right now. And like I said early on, I don't know when the last time is I've had a book that made me do that. Maybe Man's Search for Meaning. Like, it's something like that where it made me stop for very different reasons, of course. But this one made me and forced me to reconnect some dots that I've previously connected. And I had to erase some of those lines that I had connecting some ideas from the past as a result of this. And I'm not doing that blindly. I think what we've done over time is read enough books that you can kind of tell if something's not going to fit and shouldn't fit and you disagree with. But as I read this, I resonate with pretty much everything he has said. I loved the way he put his terminology together and gave me language to talk about this. Like I've mentioned earlier, like it kind of messed with my foundation of how I think about time. And there have been quite a few times, especially within the last week, that I found myself choosing not to do something because I realized it didn't matter in the long run. And I think that's exactly the right response to much of this book. It's like, I could get onto the dog for whatever it is he's doing at the time, but does that really matter? No, he's fine. It's okay. Get over it. And that's with the dog. I mean, you could do that with projects at work. You could do that with vehicle repairs. You could do it with all sorts of things. And that is something that's refreshing, and it's something that I'm grateful for having that mindset thrust upon me, because I feel like that does help with the whole mindful, be here now, pay attention to what's happening now. Don't focus on always trying to make things better for the future, and that's your sole focus. Like that's refreshing and something I'm grateful for having gone through. There's a whole section in here we didn't even talk about with patience.
Yep.
And I was very conflicted when I went through that, because I'm like that. I tend to go through books and I'm trying to hustle through them and don't want to, because I want to know what the thing is and I don't want to take the time to read to get to it. Like I want to jump ahead. And this one was weird because I really wanted to get through it. So I was very impatient with reading this, but it forced me to stop at the same time. So it was very weird. It's like, I really want to read this, but I can't read this right now. It's so strange. I'm going to join you at 5:0. I think this does warrant that. And I understand what you're saying with the hesitation on recommending it. I can see how, have you not had a big background in a lot of the productivity self-help world, I could see how this maybe wouldn't qualify as a 5:0. But giving our background, at least my background, I feel like this is kind of messed with a lot of a foundation that I need to have rocked in this case. So I'm grateful for that, and very happy that I have been forced to go through this with you. Again, I was debating picking this and was shocked when you did. So I'm glad that we went through it, and I'm grateful that we did that. So anyway, I loved his style. I thought it was a fairly easy read to do, like technically speaking. Emotionally speaking, that's a different thing. But I think it does warrant the 5:0. But again, I think you're probably right in that hesitation on it, though. I think it could be misconstrued if you don't commit to reading the whole thing. So be patient. Read the whole thing. Don't jump ahead. It's okay. You'll be fine.
Yep. Completely agree. You know, there are certain books that you can just tell this is the author's life work. Like their entire life has been leading up to this message that they are communicating. I feel like with James Clear, that's Atomic Habits. And with Oliver Burkeman, it's 4,000 Weeks.
Yes. That's probably a good way to put it. Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, so let's put 4,000 Weeks on the shelf. What's next?
Next is Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. And I have a confirmation from somebody that this is a really good book to use as a basis for getting into systems thinking. And having read 4,000 Weeks now, I'm hesitant on this one. Again, I just finished Burkeman's book this morning, so I'm starting this one tonight. So now I'm like, okay, we'll see how this goes. This is either going to be a really great contrast or this is going to be a mess. It's going to be one of those two, Mike.
All right. After that, I'm going to pick another unexpected book. I have heard some great things recently about Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown.
What? You're breaking my brain lately.
This one, I know we're not going to be able to take the traditional bookworm approach to it. I think we're going to have to just pick, probably like we did with, what was that Rolf DeBelly book? Was it The Art of Thinking Clearly? All the different biases, and we kind of picked our favorite ones and talked about them. I think we'll probably have to do the same sort of thing for this book. But this is at the top of every single chart everywhere. I mean, if there was talking about life messages in a book, like Brené Brown has a PhD, this seems like the canonical work on emotions.
Yep.
And so I feel like I've just heard so much good press about this particular book lately that I want to consider it with you.
It's been a while, but we did her other book, Daring Greatly.
Yep.
And I don't remember that you had great opinions about it. Does that sound right?
I don't remember what I rated it. I do remember the Teddy Roosevelt quote from that, though, which I really enjoyed. So,
Yep. Well, fun. You are just messing with me lately. I don't know what that's all about, but I'm on board because this one was another one I was debating doing.
cool.
So
So I'm
I'll
leaning
take
into the
it.
emotions. Joe's talking about systems. What is going on? Cats and dogs
We're
living
switching
together.
places. What's the world coming to?
All right.
Great
You
fun.
got any Gap?
Got any Gap books, Mike?
You beat me to it. I do not have a Gap book. I probably will by the time we record again have read a Gap book, but I don't have one currently. Do you?
I had to restart mine, which I wasn't expecting to do. So I'm still in the middle of Take Back Your Family by Jefferson Bethke, but I was talking about it a little bit with my wife, and she's like, I want to read that with you, like together. So then I started reading it out loud to her in the evenings whenever she's working on stuff around the house and such. So I restarted it, which means now I got to go back. But my hope is we'll be done with it for the next time. Anyway, still on the one.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you to everybody who joined us for recording live. We had a great conversation in the chat today, pretty active. If you want to join the conversation, you can do so at youtube.com/bookwormfm. Joe always tweets out via the Bookworm Twitter when we're going to do the live recordings. So follow Bookworm FM on Twitter if you want to know when those happen. Also, thank you to everybody who supports the show directly by contributing a couple bucks a month to help us keep the lights on. You can go to club.bookworm.fm to join the membership. And when you do, for $5 a month, $50 a year, I believe, you get access to a couple of bonuses, some Gap Book episodes that Joe recorded, a wallpaper I designed, and all of the MindNode files that I take notes in. I export those as MindNode files and also as PDFs, so you can just download those for your own reference or even import them into MindNode if you happen to be an iOS/Mac user like me, and use those as the jumping off point for taking your own notes in the books. I had some people share that that's how they like to do that, and I think that's a pretty cool idea. So if you want to join the awesome people who are helping us to keep this thing going, club.bookworm.fm.
Love you people. You guys are awesome. All right, if you're one of those that reads along with us, you need a systems thinking book, this is the time for you. So pick up Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks.